Hello, Math 2 students. Today we're going to start learning something very important. We're going to start learning about trigonometric ratios. In this video, you will not learn how to solve for the lengths of missing sides of right triangles. You will not learn how to solve for the angles that are missing in right triangles, but you will learn how to label the sides of the triangles so that you can use those names that you label to write trigonometric ratios. You will also learn what the trig ratios are: sine and cosine and tangent.
What we're going to do is we're going to look at triangles and we're going to learn some new names for their angles and their sides. And these names are very important when we get to solving problems about missing side lengths or missing angles using right triangle trigonometry. So the first step is to look at the triangle and identify the reference angle. The reference angle will usually be given, and the reference angle is never the right angle. So the first step is to circle the reference angle, and so that's the reference angle in the triangle on the left, and that's the reference angle in the triangle on the right. The second and third step go together. We're going to identify the two sides of the reference angle. So here's one side of the reference angle, there's the other side of the reference angle, and the reference angle is this angle right in here. So those are the two sides of the reference angle. In the triangle on the right, these are the two sides of the reference angle, and so the reference angle is right here. And once we identify the two sides of the reference angle, we're going to label one of them with an H for the hypotenuse. That will be the longer of the two sides, and the other side will be called the adjacent side. So right now in this problem, I'm going to label the hypotenuse with an H and the adjacent side with an A. The triangle on the right, I'm going to label the hypotenuse with an H and the adjacent side with an A. And then finally, the fourth step is the remaining side will be called the opposite side, and we're going to label that side with an O. So this side is the opposite side, and in the triangle on the right, this side is the opposite side. So notice that the hypotenuse is the same line segment no matter which angle was the reference angle. But the opposite side and adjacent side switched locations when we switched the reference angle. So I circle angle C. I highlight the two sides of angle C, the two sides that make up the reference angle. The longer of those two sides will be the hypotenuse, the other side will be the adjacent, and the remaining side will be the opposite. These famous fractions are usually called trigonometric ratios or trig ratios, and the first one is called the sine ratio. The sine ratio, that's just the name for a fraction that is so famous that it deserved a special name. To create the sine ratio, you write the length of the opposite side of a right triangle over the length of the hypotenuse of a right triangle. The second trig ratio is the cosine ratio. And again, this is just a fraction that is so famous in math that it has a special name. To write the cosine ratio, we write the length of the adjacent side of a right triangle over the length of its hypotenuse. And finally, the last trig ratio is the tangent ratio. And to write the tangent ratio, we write the length of the opposite side over the length of the adjacent side. It is very important that you memorize these three ratios. The sine ratio is opposite over hypotenuse, the cosine ratio is adjacent over hypotenuse, and the tangent ratio is the opposite over the adjacent. Many students remember these ratios by remembering SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA. The so part comes from sine being opposite over hypotenuse. The Ka part comes from cosine being the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and the toa part comes from tangent being the opposite over the adjacent. So if you can remember so, ka, toa, you can usually get all of the parts that you need in the right places when you're writing one of these ratios.
Hello, class. There's nothing more important about right triangle trigonometry than you memorizing that sine is the opposite side of a right triangle over its hypotenuse. Cosine is the adjacent side of a right triangle over its hypotenuse. And tangent is the opposite side of a right triangle over its adjacent side. In order to help you remember those three famous fractions of right triangle trigonometry, we are going to sing this song, Miss Olson Hates SOHCAHTOA. We started school before September, there's been a lot to remember. Now it's Trig, what can you do? SOHCAHTOA can help you through. But Miss Olson hates SOHCAHTOA. Please don't tell her that I told you. Miss Olson hates SOHCAHTOA. Please don't tell her that I told you. This is the fist bump part. SOHCAHTOA. Three small words you never say. So when you leave me in math 2 and Mrs. Olson's asking you what you learned in my class, do not say you will not pass. Cause Miss Olson hates SOHCAHTOA. Please don't tell her that I told you. Miss Olson hates SOHCAHTOA. Please don't tell her that I told you. Fist bump time. SOHCAHTOA. Three small words you never say. I'm sure if you listen to this song about 300 times, you'll never forget that sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent.
So in this problem, they want us to find the tangent of y. So we'll be using the tangent ratio, and our reference angle is angle y. So we highlight the two sides of the triangle that make up the reference angle, angle y. We label the longer of those two sides as the hypotenuse and the shorter of those two sides as the adjacent. And then the remaining side that's not highlighted is called the opposite side. If we want to find the tangent ratio, then what we need to do is just write a fraction that has the length of the opposite side on the top and the length of the adjacent side on the bottom. So the answer to this question will look like this. The tangent of y is the opposite over the adjacent, so that's 28 over 45. And that's the answer to this problem. On this problem, they want us to find the sine of w. Since we're finding the sine of w, we'll use a different ratio, and w is now our reference angle. So we highlight the two sides of angle w. The longer of those two sides is the hypotenuse. The shorter of those two sides is the adjacent. And then the other side or remaining side is always called the opposite. So in order for us to finish this problem, we just need to write the sine ratio. And the sine ratio is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So our opposite is 45 and our hypotenuse is 53. So our answer is the fraction 45 over 53.
All right, after watching this video, I hope that you know how to label, first of all, the hypotenuse, then the adjacent side, then the opposite side of a right triangle. And I hope that you know how to write trig ratios. I hope you know that sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, and tangent is the opposite side over the adjacent side. Thanks for watching.